Middle East, where the possibility of a long and sustained war continue to pose a threat. We turn our attention to a new and deeply troubling risk in the Middle East tonight: the desalination plants that supply drinking water to millions across the Gulf. A serious strike, sabotage operations, cyber attack or contamination affecting water plants could not just damage commerce, it could trigger a rapid human security crisis by threatening drinking water, electricity, sanitation and public order, all at the same time. The Gulf region runs more than 400 desalination plants. Together, they produce about 40% of the total desalinated water in the entire world. For several countries, these plants are not just important, they are the only source of fresh water for everyday life. A single strike on any of these large fixed targets could cut off drinking water and trigger a humanitarian crisis on a scale we have not yet seen in this war. The conflict has already moved from oil refineries and ports to data centers, and experts now warn that water systems may be the next step in escalation. Heating water infrastructure would take the fighting far beyond the current energy markets, straight into the daily life and survival of entire population in the Middle East. And look at how dependent the Gulf states are. In Kuwait, 90% of the water comes from desalination. In the UAE, it's 100%. In Saudi Arabia, about 70% of the drinking water comes from these plants. Oman gets about 86% of its drinking water from desalination plants. And these are not just backup systems, they are the main supply. And that is why they are such tempting wartime targets. But there's a deeper geopolitical game at play here. By threatening these plants, Tehran may try to fracture the relationship between United States and the Gulf allies. The goal seems very clear: push Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar to put pressure on Washington to step in and end the fighting. Qatar has already warned that continued war could hurt global economic growth, but any serious disruption to oil, LNG or now water could send prices soaring and cause shortages far beyond the region. The Gulf states also hold huge investments inside the United States. Those financial ties have now become a new form of leverage. The UAE has pledged more than $1.4 trillion rupees in long-term investments here. $1.4 trillion in long-term investments here. Saudi Arabia has launched a $40 billion push into artificial intelligence. Gulf money is flowing into major American tech companies and data centers, including OpenAI, Anthropic and XAI. If the war spreads to water and the economic pain grows any further, those same Gulf partners could use their financial weight to urge Washington to contain the conflict and push for a ceasefire. We're looking at a conflict that could evolve from a struggle over energy into a global shock involving high tech, high finance, and the most basic human need: water. So the big question that we're asking tonight: could an attack on water infrastructure force America's Gulf allies to demand an end to the war? And if the Gulf states feel the US is not doing enough to protect their critical infrastructure, could we see a strategic withdrawal of trillions of dollars currently invested in the US tech and AI? Joining me on the show is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, former Indian diplomat and a Middle East expert. Also with us is Dr. Alawide Ninguthojam, who's a Deputy Director and Assistant Professor, Symbiosis School of International Studies, and a former consultant, National Security Council Secretariat, PMO. Also with us is Patikrit Pine, Foreign Affairs expert. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking time out. I would like to first begin with you, Ambassador. We are looking at this war fast spreading now beyond oil, what we initially thought was the sole objective. We've seen data centers being attacked, and the experts are now warning that any attack on water plants, particularly desalination plants, could cripple not just the Middle East, but could potentially end the war. Do you see a possibility where Iran would make that mistake?
It wouldn't be a mistake, it would be a deliberate decision. And if that happens, it will have very, very serious consequences. You are referring to an article today by Bloomberg columnist Xavier Blas, who says that the critical commodity in the Gulf is not oil, but water. And he's given the figure of 450 desalination plants. I think what you can also emphasize is that 10 million of around 50 million population dependent on water in the Gulf is Indians. And that population being denied water on a semi-permanent basis would have a serious consequence. The expatriates may certainly demand us to pull them out of that place. Uh, I think this is a strong contingency, and Iran would do it only as the last measure because uh, this would have its own consequences and this cannot be undone. Finally, I would also like to add that this could be, these and other vulnerabilities are the reasons why the Gulf countries, the GCC countries, have not retaliated against Iran. They have rather shown discretion to be better part of value and condemned attacks on various installations that United States runs or their own installations such as hotels, but have not retaliated, even though their weapon systems, their air forces are far more modern than 5-decade-old Iranian counterparts.
Right.
There are reasons why the Gulf states are holding their hand.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. There's a reason the Gulf states are holding their hand. Dr. Alawite Ningthamjam, do you agree that countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, who depend heavily on desalination for their basic needs, for their drinking water, are holding their hand because they believe that any strike or any attempted strike on any of these critical infrastructure could be damning?
Thank you, Shweta, for having me on the show. Yeah, I would agree with you that if you look at the records or if you look at the numbers, about 12 of the world's 17 most water stressed countries are located in MENA region, that is Middle East and North African region. And we have seen this sort of a conflict related to water in the in the mid 60s also. The Israeli Palestinian conflict also had got to do a little bit of water with regard to the diversion of water from the Jordan River. And as a result, there are many infrastructures that have been, constructed and established by these countries over the period of time, knowing that water is one of the most important, next to the oil, most important commodities these countries have. And sometime in the late 80s, the former Secretary General of the UN, Boutros Ghali, also had mentioned that the next war in the Middle East will be fought over water and not over oil politics. So if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, and for that matter, all the countries in the region rely heavily on desalination plants, and some of these countries have also really acquired this technology from different parts of the world. So if tomorrow Iranians decide, they are already doing that in certain parts of the region by bombing some of the civilian infrastructure, and that could be one of the tactics that could be used by the Iranians to put more pressure on the Gulf countries to open up some sort of a channel of communication or pressure on the United States to put an halt to this conflict. So we are at a very critical juncture, and further destruction of this infrastructure would lead to various other problems, not only about oil and energy.
Absolutely. Patikrit Pine, Persian Gulf countries, can in the short run absorb all kind of shock, including shock to their oil disruption, including tourism, rerouting of trade. But what they can't absolutely not do with is water. And that's the concern many experts are raising today.
Absolutely.
Well, none of the Gulf Arab states have any capacity to absorb any shock in the long run. What is happening now is this. Let's start with a small caveat. None of the Gulf Arab states have medium or short-range ballistic missile. Iran has it. None of them have any capacity to build loitering munitions into thousands every month. Iran has it. So Iran has, over the last several decades, mastered the art of asymmetric warfare. That's why many of the Gulf states are holding back. Number two, what Iran is doing is this. It is raising the cost of alliance for the Gulf states, alliance with United States. For a long period of time, for decades, these Gulf Arab states have flourished at the cost of sanctions imposed by United States on Iran, right? And secondly, for a long period of time, these Arab states were at the luxury on the presumption that the security umbrella of United States is good enough to protect them. Now, if you look at the series of attacks that are happening, which have successfully breached their air defense system, targeted critical energy infrastructure, air bases of United States, there is a severe shortage of interceptor missiles, which most of the Gulf Arab states right now is facing. So what the red line Iran is drawing for many of these Gulf states is this, that if you want to stay away from the war, number one, shun your alliance with the Americans, ask them to leave the bases. And number two, if you want to have no war, then speak up against what is happening. Because I think there's an apprehension in Iran that whatever is happening right now, it is not just Israel which is responsible, as per their perception. It is the Arab states who wanted this to happen because they have been always been uncomfortable with the Shiite state having a nuclear bomb. However, the bigger issue is this, that when it comes to water, when it comes to, there's an exodus that Iran is trying to push on many of these states, because all these Arab states are actually flourishing at the cost, or they're dependent, over dependent on external, expats working here. Now you see this exodus that is happening to the extent that there's some of the hotels beside Burj Khalifa now, as per certain reports, allowing people to stay overnight for 2 days for just $9. That's the level of impact this loitering munitions are having. So they're trying to do is that we will destroy your economy if you do not stay away from this conflict. What is the biggest issue? Again, going back to the same thing. As per the Iranians, no Israeli missile, no American missile can reach Iran unless it breaches the airspace of the Arab states. Water is a dangerous thing. I don't think the Iranians will go for the water, because the sympathy that many of the people in the Arab states, if not the monarchies, they have for this, the people of Iran against America, that will go away if water is targeted. But every other infrastructure, including data centers, would be targeted, because they are raising the cost of number one alliance for the Arab states. They are raising the cost of investments by American companies into the Arab states. So it is like this: if I am under sanction, if I am going down, I will not let you flourish anymore. That is the philosophy, but it appears to be in Iran. Back to you.
All right. That's the philosophy, Ambassador, that if I'm not allowed to sustain, I'll ensure that the cost of alliance for you is also very high and you pay up the price. But there's a clear red line. Patikrit is pointing out that Iran will be drawing right now, because Iran continues to also enjoy much of the sympathy in the Middle East. Even as the regime is hated, there's a sympathetic wave, not just in the West, but also in the Middle East, towards Iran and the Iranian people who are suffering as a result of that war. That goes away the minute water infrastructure is attacked.
Yes, that is accurate to a large extent. At the same time, Iran has other targets in mind: electricity, its oil and gas related infrastructure. In 2019, Al-Buqaik infrastructure of Saudi Arabia was attacked by pro-Iranian Iraqi militias. It used to be responsible for nearly 20% of world's crude oil being processed. And that was attacked to warn Saudi Arabia not to go too close to in an anti-Houthi direction. The Saudis expected Trump, who was in power in Trump 1.0, to flatten the downtown Tehran in retaliation, but Trump shied away. And that is where Saudis got the message. And they then went to China to have reconciliation with Iran. So all that is history. And I think Saudis and UAE and others would have other recourses on their part to rehabilitate Iran, to get them back on rails, promise that after the war gets a reprieve, they would help Iran reconstruct. and they would take some pain, some symbolic harm to their infrastructure, to their civilians, and so on, provided it's within a certain containable and sporadic basis. Now, the strategic infrastructure, such as oil pipelines, refineries, as Ras Tanura, have also been attacked. Uh, and the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked, although Iranian Foreign Minister today has made a very surprising statement that Strait of Hormuz is open and Iran has not blocked it. It may be a response to the GCC pressure, a quid pro quo for them to approach United States as a sort of a ramp off. So let's see where it takes. Mr. Trump would also not like to escalate endlessly, although he has been talking about long war and United States being prepared for it. But he knows that midterm elections are due for the Congress in November. And by September, he would rather like to have everything under control, get the inflation under control, get the uh, petrol prices in the United States under $2 a barrel, as he claimed in his State of Union message, although the price has gone up by 50% in the past 1 week. So all that put together, the United States administration would also not like an endless war. That kind Mr. Trump railed against his predecessors for starting in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Absolutely. And Trump has claimed a lot of things, including the fact that he'll end the Russia-Ukraine war 10 days. After 10 days in power, he hasn't been able to do so now. So Trump claims what he claims. But on the other hand, the reality on the ground, Dr. Alvite, is that, we're looking at a war that's entering its day 7th tomorrow. And there is no possibility of any end to it. It's only getting deeper and deeper. We now know that, in fact, Saudi has also vowed retaliation with the US backing and with a closed airspace. In your assessment, what could be the next phase of this war if it were to prolong any further from here? Because from the very start, I think on the American side, we've heard authorities saying that this will not extend beyond 3 to 4 weeks. I've spoken to a number of experts here on the show as well, ambassadors, people in position of power, including IDF spokesperson, who said that about 3 to 4 weeks is what they're giving it as far as the ongoing war is concerned. But with more data centers, more oil pipelines, with Strait of Hormuz being blocked or not blocked, as a matter of fact, what Abbas Araghchi said this afternoon, that it's not really blocked. But fact of the matter is that this is becoming a very complicated war with each passing day. In your assessment, what's the end to it from here? Could you unmute yourself?
Sorry, yeah. To predict an end of this conflict would be foolhardy, given, looking at the way how the developments are taking place in the region. It has already been escalated to a very serious level. This is also an opportunity for Israel, and also for the Americans to really go after any sort of, affiliations to do with the IRGC or the regime. So this is going to be a long haul in terms of the targets, in terms of the attacks coming from Israel also. And at the same time, for the Gulf countries, as of today, they are on the defensive line. They have not been, they have not started with any of their offensive campaigns against Iran or whatever that they have been facing for the last 6.5, almost 7 days. So, I think there's also a possibility of these countries, crossing their thresholds of patience at some point in time, and they might retaliate again. So there could be some sort of a collective understanding amongst the Gulf countries, despite the, whatever that we have seen between UAE and Saudi Arabia in the last few months, the perceived cracks that have come in between Emiratis and the Saudis. There's also a possibility of some sort of an understanding amongst the Gulf Cooperation Council countries to give back some sort of a collective, response to what the Iranians are doing right now. So if that ever happens, the conflict is not going to end anytime soon. But at the same time, the Americans, they have already, made a very clear statement that they will not But yeah, as we have been discussing, all my other co-panelists also have been talking about that how much of this Iranian tactics, would result in the Gulf countries putting a lot more pressure on the Americans, and that also remains to be seen. But for now, the situation is very fluid. The conflict can go in any direction, and at the same time, whatever that we are seeing in the Strait of Hormuz, and also the impact that is likely to be felt in our country in terms of our energy security, in terms of the the safety of the diaspora in the region, are some of the primary concerns for India. So the more the war prolongs, it is going to be a major concern and a major nightmare for even for India and for the regional countries as well as for the international community.
Absolutely. Patikrit Pine, assuming that US goes to a phase 2 of this strike, goes beyond airstrikes and starts with ground invasion, the possibility of which is highly unlikely, how do you see the phase 2 panning out?
First and foremost, we don't understand, we don't know what is the end objective of United States. If they say that it's going to end in 1 month or 2 months, I mean, that's the same estimation they had for Iraq. It went on for a decade. They had the same estimation about Afghanistan. 20 years later, they had to exit Afghanistan. They had the same estimation about Libya and Syria. Both are in mess. Eventually, they created a terrorist as a president of Syria, who is the present president. So if you look at what the Americans do, look, air superiority does not lead to change of regime. If they will never dare to put the boots on ground. Iran is a huge country with massive strategic depth. I have no sympathy for the regime. But what happens is that when you have this kind of brutal external intervention, it galvanizes the country into one under the flag. That is what is happening perhaps in case of Iraq, also Iran as well. So Iran has an IRGC and the Basij with probably 1 million strong soldier, apart from the Iranian army, which is separate. So you have 1.5 million soldiers, or maybe more than that, waiting for the Americans to step in. If they do not step in, and what they're planning is that they want to send in the Syrian jihadis inside Iran to start a sectarian war, a Shia-Sunni conflict. If they're planning to send in the Kurds from Iraq into Iran, then it is going to create a bloodbath. And this is one bloodbath which will result in terror attacks, mostly in the Gulf Arab states.
It's interesting you pointed that out, because Kurds have vehemently denied that we're not going to be used as a pawn of the United States this morning.
Yes, there are certain divisions of the Kurds who are against it, but Kurds themselves are not a united thing. There are different Kurds. There's a Peshmerga, there is a PKK, there are several aspects. But I'm saying that the Americans are planning to do something like this. The Syrians, ISIS kind of elements, the Al-Nusra and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they are ready to send 100,000 inside Iran. It's going to be a bloodbath. So if you have to understand how the Iran war is going to shape up, from 1980 to 1988, there was a war between Iraq and Iran. That time, Iraq was backed by United States and Saudi Arab to fight against Iran. They had an 8-year-long war, and even then they had to have a status quo. There was no victor in that. Iran withstood that in spite of sanctions and everything. So it's a very difficult area for America to claim that in 1 month we will be packing up and going. Americans don't know what is their end objective. They want a change of regime or just to restrict the Iranians from having a nuclear bomb. That's one. Secondly, what may happen is, rightly so, as has been mentioned by others, 1 month down the line, Trump would say, I'm packing bags, my job is done, I've killed, whoever I wanted to kill. The regime has changed, so my job is done. And he's going to leave the whole of Middle East into a complete disarray. This is what is going to happen, and this has been the text before also. This is a script that has been played several times. Every time there has been a war in Middle East, it's continued for half a decade eventually. And it's not. Please understand, war is business. War is not anti-economic. There are countries, there are military industrial complexes, there are energy complexes, there are insurance companies who make billions of dollars out of a war like this. It's just that somebody else is going to die. The Americans have always fought war away from their homeland. And another thing, nobody is innocent in this war. The Arabs, for a long period of time, spread radicalism elsewhere. The Iranians did the same thing by spreading radicalism through Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas. So everybody now will have to face the price of funding war somewhere else, which is coming to haunt them today. This is inevitable. I am just telling you one thing, that Israelis and the Americans are being blamed, but this is also an issue which is probably 1,000-year-old, the sectarian animosity that exists in that region, which keeps cropping up from time to time. The biggest proponent of sanctions against Iran in whole of Middle East was not Israel, but the Arab states. And that is what they're going to take revenge on. And the kind of surge capacity the Iranians have to churn out 10,000, 12,000 drones every month, something even best of the countries don't have.
Absolutely.
They have prepared for this war for decades.
Yeah.
That is what I'm trying to say. And this is not going to end well.
Yeah, 100%. I think everybody agrees this is not going to end well and it's not going to end soon. I think there is an agreement on that as well. Unless, of course, one of the two sides backs down. Iran is unlikely to back down. President Trump has also made it clear that US is not ready to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate about. Dr. Alvite, before I close the show, I have to ask you, when it comes to impact on India, besides the long-term energy shortage, what is the imminent impact on India as far as this war is concerned?
See, the imminent impact on India would be the safety of our citizens who are in West Asia. There are about more than 9.8 million Indian workforce. The evacuation of this strong, diaspora community from the region back to India would be a major task for the Indian government should the tensions escalate or should the conflict escalate further from here on. And again, we are already discussing in different corners about the impact this will likely have on our LNG, particularly the liquefied natural gas, because Qatar has stopped, pumping their gas in their plant. In the long run, regardless of how much we are diversifying our energy sources from West Asia by importing from other parts of the world, there are 3 to 4 countries that have been major suppliers of crude oil and energy to India. So in the long run, short term, medium term, this is going to be another problem. So yeah, for me, the two most important concern for us would be the safety of our Indians should the war escalate further, and also the interruptions in the oil and energy supply to us.